Hello and welcome back. Now, usually I feature a top performer for the previous week in the thumbnail, and it's usually the same guys, Kucherov, McKinnon, McDavid, Matthews, but we really have to highlight someone new here, and that is Noah Dobson. He's riding a 5-game point streak with 9 assists, 3 power play points, 13 shots, 5 hits, 14 blocks in that span. He's been an absolute fantasy stud all season long, and he'll be featured in an upcoming video about Fantasy All-Stars as we head into the All-Star break. Now, speaking of the All-Star break, we need to discuss the schedule because things are very different this week. So 44 games spread out over 2 weeks with the All-Star break. That means 2 weeks are going to be jammed into one for your fantasy week. So that means 6 games in the front half, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then a break, then 38 games in the second half of the week. So there's going to be a lot less volume this week. Now, quick couple of notes here. San Jose has no second half games. They've got this back-to-back on Tuesday, Wednesday in the first half. And then a lot of the teams that only play, the teams that play 1 or no games in the front half have a bunch more in the second half. So that is something to think about as we move forward. But in terms of a volume play, you're still going to have the same amount of ads that you normally do spread across 2 weeks. So you got to use them wisely. So what you can do here is pick up a player from one of these 3 teams in the front half. These teams have 2 games between Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So you've got Nashville, Ottawa, and San Jose. That'll get you 2 games in the front half. Then you drop that player, and then you've got a couple different options. You could go with one of the 4-game weeks for the second half. You've got Colorado, Vancouver, Washington with 4 games. They are Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday heavy, but only Saturday is the real heavy night. So you either go with the front-loaded back-to-back with Colorado, the back-loaded back-to-backs with Vancouver or Washington, and that will get you a total of 6 games for the week. So you get 2 here and 4 here. If you want that additional game, you can pick up somebody from one of these teams up here, get those 2 games in the front half, then you switch it over to a team like the Rangers who play a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Really nice setup there with a nice game against Chicago in Chicago on that Friday. That should be a relatively open game with some scoring in there. Then after that game, you drop one of your Rangers and you pick up somebody who's got a back end back-to-back here. So Saturday, Sunday back-to-back. And there are other teams you can see here, Vancouver and Washington. But if you were grabbing one of those guys, you could potentially grab them for the entire week instead of doing all this. Or you could go and grab a St. Louis Blue and get this road back-to-back in Buffalo and in Montreal. So that will give you 7 total games. So this is an opportunity for you to use those ads wisely. And the main way that this works, volume will work better for peripherals than for offensive metrics. So for offense, better players with only 4 games could outperform a lesser player with 6 or 7. So it is worth it to think about who you're going to drop or how you're going to approach this. Usually those guys that you're going to want to add for volume are hits, blocks, and shots guys. So we're going to be featuring a lot of those guys in the next section of this video. So up next, we'll take a look at the first half streamers, then we'll take a look at Colorado specifically, and then we'll take a look at the second half streamers. So for the first half streamers, there are a number of names, and a lot of these guys have the same type of thing in common with peripherals being at the forefront. So let's take a look at the first guy up on the list, Jeremy Lauzon. Now, as we pull up his hub, you can see right off the bat, 100th percentile in hits. 4 hits per game is absolutely insane. He leads the NHL in hits per game with 4.02, and a lot of that has to do with what he's been doing lately. 35 hits in his last 6 games. He had a 12-hit game on January 15th, so he likes to hit every single person that moves on the ice. And if you're going to get a game like that every now and then, I mean, he's putting up 5, 6, 7 hit games regularly. And then if he's going to give you a 12-hit game, that's absolute insanity. He's probably a season-long hold if you have hits in a categories league or if your points league weights 1 point per hit. He's definitely a must-own for that in and of itself. On top of that, he does have a couple of goals. So 5 goals on the season is not bad. He's basically like a defensive Tom Wilson in that sense that he's a goal scorer with hitting and a little bit of shot volume. The shot volume is relatively low, but the offensive production hasn't been horrendous for a player who's mainly known for hits. 197 hits in 49 games is crazy. 5 goals, 3 assists with that. So not a ton of offensive production, but it has been coming lately more so than previously. but he's 37% owned, so he may not be there for you. If you need a better option that's a little bit less owned, sorry, not better, but better in terms of ownership, 13% owned is Luke Shen. He is 99th percentile in hits, and look at how much further down he is in hits per game, 2.83. That's the gap between Lazan at 100th percentile and Shen at 99th percentile. He also gets 1.27 blocks per game, which is nice to have, so he's a little bit more complete in that regard, but 19 hits in his last 6 games is really impressive as well. Both of these guys are usually hits and block specialists. Obviously, Lazan, definitely more of a hitter. So is Shen, and of the two, Lazan would be the better hitter. But both of these guys are there for you if you want those peripherals. But if you want some peripherals in a forward who can potentially get you some offensive production, Colton Sissons, I mentioned him a couple of weeks ago when we featured Nashville in one of the weekly videos, 11% owned. He's got 4 points in his last 6 games, 2 power play points, but he's getting 15 shots, 12 hits, and 11 blocks in those 6 games. So what you're seeing from him is pretty decent hit volume, 1.63 per game. 89th percentile in blocks for a centerman is really nice to have. And he's on that first power play unit with Forsberg, with Yossi, with O'Reilly. So getting that opportunity on the power play, making it count, 2 power play points in the last 6. So this is an opportunity to find some peripherals, but also add in some offensive production. Now, as we switch over to Ottawa, just a quick note, if Thomas Chabot is there on your waiver wire, go out and grab him right now. 62% owned, 1 goal, 4 assists, 4 power play points, 17 shots, 8 hits, 9 blocks in his last 7 games. But he's not a streamer. He's more of a long-term hold, which is why we're not featuring him here where we're looking at volume and potentially adding someone for a stream. But if he is available, go out and grab him. He's been red hot since coming back from injury. As far as Norris goes, he was red hot when he came back, and then he kind of went ice cold for 5, 6, 7 games in the later stretch of December into January. Went out for a couple games. Now he's back, 3 assists, a power play point, 11 shots, and 5 hits in his last 5 games. So he's starting to come back around. You can see here it's kind of been up and down for him. A 74 up to a 78, back down, 77, now down to a 75. He's normally a goal scorer with shot volume and power play production. And on top of that, he's averaging a hit per game, which is nice for an offensive player who's on PP1 in Ottawa. He's only 24% owned. And again, he did go ice cold, so some people may be a little bit hesitant to add him. But he is one of those guys that I've owned over the last 2 seasons. I have him on one of my teams right now. And it has been hot and cold. But when he's hot, he is unstoppable. And he is a goal scorer. So he had a 5 or 6 game goal scoring streak in the early part of December. That's what you would be hoping for coming out of the All-Star break with Norris. If you're in a deeper league, the one guy that you could potentially go out and grab is Ridley Gregg. I mentioned him last year briefly as kind of, somebody to keep an eye on. He hasn't been, crazy productive. 7 points in his last 10 is good. It's not great. He's usually a middle 6 forward for them. But 1.6 hits per game is worth noting here. And you can see his trend going from a 55 all the way up now to a 63. He's been improving each week in January. So he's been getting a little bit more of an opportunity and making it count. That could potentially be a result of the coaching change. Jacques Martin may be relying on him a little bit more because he gets engaged physically. So just something to keep on your radar. If you're in a deeper league, he could be a decent option. Now, in terms of San Jose Sharks, you could obviously go with Tomas Hertl. You could obviously, try some of the tried and true guys that we've looked at. Duclair's been ice cold lately, so I wouldn't recommend going to him right now. But Fabian Zetterlund, usually a shot volume guy. So 22 shots in his last 6 games, 3 points in his last 6. The blocks is pretty good for a forward, so 0.9 blocks per game, 1 hit per game. And then the shot volume is relatively nice, which is what you would add him for just those front half, the 2 back-to-back games. So hopefully you would get some shots out of him and maybe some offensive production, and that would be what you're mainly owning him for. 78th percentile in goals is not bad, 14 goals on the season in 49 games. So, just under a 30-goal pace for Zetterlund. This could be a potential opportunity in a deeper league at 2% owned. But he's not necessarily going to be the best season-long hold. That would potentially go to Logan Couture. Now, the reason I have nothing underneath his name, he hasn't done anything since coming back from injury. But We know what he's capable of, and this is a very small sample size. So 1.25 blocks per game, 1.75 hits per game. He also takes a ton of face-offs, so that would be another reason to own him if you're in a face-off league. I've been holding him on IR in my one face-off league. Hopefully he can boost my team at this point, because that has been a little bit of a dry spot. But he's a guy, 37% owned, single position center. And if we look at what he did last year, he was an 82 on the preseason hub, 90th percentile in points, 89th in goals, 87th in assists, 85th in shots, 87th in power play, a hit and a half per game, and 0.85 blocks per game. And he's pretty consistent over the last 5 years doing that. So right around a 79, basically a 77 is his median. 78, 79, right, in that range. So that's typically what he's been good for. If you compare that with this year, he's a 46. So there's a ton of room for improvement. Obviously, it's a very small sample size to get that 46, and he has no offensive production to speak of since coming back from injury. But now would be the time to get out in front of it. 37% owned. I doubt that stays there. He would probably be the same type of player as a Thomas Hertl, where, if they have a good week, you look at him as one of the tried and true guys that you could potentially go to. But that's going to do it for the first half streams. Now let's turn and take a look at the Colorado Avalanche. And we're going to do that because they do have a number of players that are potentially ownable and are relatively hot. So we'll start with the peripheral theme and look at Josh Manson. 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points, 11 hits, and 9 blocks in his last 4 games. And as we look at his hub, you can see he's a really good hitter. 2.36 hits per game is really nice to have. 1.5 blocks per game on top of that, which is a 55th percentile for a defenseman, but relatively good in general. Not a lot of power play time, not any power play points at all, but he does score some goals. So 6 goals on the year. As I mentioned, the league leader for defensive scoring is 13 goals on the season. So he's right around a little bit under half of that. So pretty decent for a guy who's known for his peripherals. And in a week where they're going to get 4 games this week and some pretty decent opponents where he could potentially getting you some hits and blocks, this would be a really nice add for those peripherals and a hope of offensive production as well. You can see here he's been trending up basically since, December 24th, and he's been jumping up each and every week, kind of stagnant over the last week, but really productive since that Christmas break, and he's one of those guys that you can potentially add at 31% owned. Now, up next, we have to talk about Logan O'Connor, and this is the theme in terms of the second line for Colorado. So the second line right now is O'Connor, Miles Wood, and Ross Colton. We will get to these guys in a second. For O'Connor, it's been 6 goals in his last 6 or 7 games, I believe, but it goes back further than that. 8 goals, 5 assists, 13 points in his last 12. You can see here he's gone from a 46 all the way up to a 57, and it's been a nice steady climb week over week. He's a relatively decent goal scorer, so 13 goals on the year for Logan O'Connor. He's been a middle 6, if not a depth player for them for a long time, and now he's finally getting an opportunity in the top 6, so that could potentially explain that offensive production. He's 11% owned and a single position right winger, so that is, the shot volume is a little bit low. You're not going to get power play production, but if you want access to that ice time, that second line potential in Colorado, O'Connor is the hottest of that line. Now, up next, we have Miles Wood. He's a guy that does get looks every now and then in the top 6 because of his speed. He's a very fast player, and that can potentially open up things for his line mates, which seems to have been the case with this new line with him, O'Connor, and Colton. 6 points in his last 5 games, line 2, as I mentioned, and he's been slowly climbing. This could potentially coincide with when he got this line assignment, and he bumped up in production up to a 56. The shot volume is a little bit better at 2 shots per game, 1.11 hits per game. So over the season, it hasn't been great, but lately it has been. But if you want access to this top 6 and a guy who's going to get you PP1 exposure, you have to go to Ross Colton, at least for the time being. They had Nichushkin on that power play unit. Obviously, he is out now. Now, Ross Colton, dual position eligible, which could explain his ownership being the highest of the 3. 7 points in his last 6 games, 2 power play points in that span, and it's very consistent. He does a little bit of everything, blocks, 1.36 hits per game, getting some power play points lately, just under 2 shots per game. You'd like to see a little bit more there. The assists are okay. The goals, you're not getting anything crazy productive out of him. He's been a third line center for them for most of the season. Now he's getting bumped up to the second line, and he's getting that power play time. So that's what you would potentially want. And you can see here he's been trending up basically since early December, 62 all the way up now to a 70, slow and steady up until early January, and then kind of taking a little bit more of a vertical trend up in the right direction here. So this would be a guy you could potentially get on the waiver wire in most leagues. But there is one other guy we have to talk about. There's no stats there because he hasn't been the most productive, and that is Artturi Lehkonen. Since coming back from injury, you can see not the best. He just kind of fell off a cliff there, but that's mainly because he's still getting acclimated and back up to speed. But the reason you would own him, you can see here he's a 72. The power play production, 0.29 power play points per game, is really good. 92nd percentile there, 4 power play points in 14 games. Again, small sample size because he's been out. 2.71 shots per game is really nice. The assists are pretty good. The goals will probably continue to improve on that. And the reason being, if we take a look at what he did last year, this is his preseason hub, and you can see here the power play points are right around where they are now, 93rd percentile. The shots were a little bit lower. The assists were pretty good at 0.47 assists per game, and the goal production, 0.33 goals per game. So and this 80 completeness rating overall, that's 8 points higher than where he is now. So you're potentially baking in some of that improvement into picking him up right now. So 37% owned. You grab him now while he's not productive, and you hope that he gets that line 2 power play 1 assignment that Colton has currently. Right now he's on the third line with Ryan Johansson, and that's not necessarily the best spot for him. If he gets a look in the top 6, and if he gets that power play 1 time, he's going to be a must-own, similar to Nichushkin in production on that power play unit. So if you're going to try to grab a Colorado forward or whatever for this span, the best current streamers would be Colton, Wood, O'Connor, obviously Manson for peripherals, but longer term outlook, you might want to go out and grab Artturi Lehkonen, as he's been one of the more productive forwards in their top 6 over the last 2 seasons. But that's going to do it for the Colorado ads. Now let's take a look at the rest of the second half of the week ads that you could potentially have, and we'll again focus on peripherals being the main focus here. Now, before we get into Dakota Joshua, and this kind of goes back to that second line that we were just talking about, but Pius Suter, 1% owned, 4 goals, 2 assists, 6 points, 2 power play points in his last 6 games. He's red hot right now, but this break may cool him off, and that may be the case with that second line in Colorado, so that is something to keep in mind. That's why I mentioned Lehkonen if you're looking for a little bit longer term ad, and if you're worried about that hot streak coming to an end because of this break. Sometimes players are red hot, they get a little bit of a break, they come back, and that hot streak is gone. So that's why we're not mentioning Suter. But if you want those peripherals, there's hard to find a better option than Dakota Joshua for Vancouver. 98th percentile in hits, 2.98 hits per game, and he's getting you some goal production. So 12 goals on the year in 48 games is pretty good. This is similar in terms of the way that it's breaking down to a guy like Tom Wilson. So Wilson is a hitter with goal volume and a little bit of better shot volume than 1.23 shots per game. And Wilson has been getting some power play time. Wilson's 51% owned, by the way, and he's 2 points in his last 8 games, and he's got a bunch of hits, but he's coming off of an injury. So those hits could potentially increase coming back after the All-Star break. But going back to Joshua, he is one of those guys in the middle 6 for Vancouver. He's basically been a third liner, but Rick Tocchet loves him, loves his engagement because of this physicality. He's been trending up since early December from a 45. He got as high as a 63. He's down to a 61, but you're getting a ton of hits from him and 3 points in his last 6. So relatively offensively productive for a hitter. If you want those hits to come from the back end, you've got Nikita Zadorov back there, 18 hits in his last 6 games, 3 hits per game in that span, which is an improvement on his season-long 1.93 hits per game. Not a whole lot else going on, and as you can see, he dropped from a 54 down to the mid-40s and has pretty much stayed there for a while. You're mainly just getting hits out of him. You could go to Tyler Myers, who's got a little bit better of a split between hits and blocks, 70th and 77th percentile compared to 90th and a lot less in terms of blocks for Zadorov. So those are your 2 peripheral options, and he is a little bit more complete in terms of a little bit better offensive production, plus spreading out the hits and blocks. 1.27 hits, 1.9 blocks per game for Tyler Myers. Didn't put him on this list, but these are two kind of interchangeable pieces on that blue line that you could get access to. Zadorov 6% owned. I don't have Myers off the top of my head, but both guys are relatively ownable. Now, as we turn to Washington, Max Pacioretty, obviously we know he's been out multiple times with Achilles injuries. He took a little bit of time to come back, which is understandable because, getting back up to speed after missing basically the last 2 seasons is not easy. He started to put it together in the last 7 games, 5 assists, 3 power play points, 21 shots in that 7-game span. So 3 shots per game, which is a little bit of an improvement. And you can see here 2.25 on the season. But again, the last 7 games, he's been shooting more and not getting the goal production. Only 1 goal on the year for Pacioretty is very uncharacteristic. So I would assume with the shot volume he's got heading into the All-Star break, plus the fact that he is on that top power play unit, basically across from Ovechkin on that other side, this could be a potential add. 22% owned. He's not owned up yet. This would be kind of a longer-term play, but there is a significant injury risk with Pacioretty, which is probably why people are staying away from him. But you might as well. If you're going to look for a 4-game week from somebody in Washington, there's not a whole lot going on offensively. He could be your best add going forward longer term. But if you are looking for that short-term add, Dylan Strome has been one of the guys that's been relatively consistent in that role for them. He's top power play. If I can pull his name up here. He's been top power play for the Caps. He's 90th percentile in goals, which is pretty nice. 19 goals on the year. Not as many assists, 12 on the year for assist coverage, 0.26 per game. Shot volume is a little bit lower than what we usually like in that 3 shot per game range. He's down around 2.09, but he is getting some power play usage, 9 power play points on the year, and he gets a couple of blocks. He does not hit at all, but he has been steadily improving back since early December, 56 all the way up now to a 66. So 23% owned, single position center, 6 points in his last 7 games. There's not a whole lot to pick from in terms of offensive production in Washington. You could go with some of the depth guys, Protas, Beck Malenstein, some of these kind of relatively obscure names. But if you want some of that offensive production, Pacioretty and Dylan Strome are probably your best options. Now, the Rangers, there's not a whole lot going on, and this is my area of expertise. I watch every game. I'm a very disgruntled Rangers fan at the moment, but Will Cooley has been hitting pretty consistently all season long. The offensive production comes and goes because he's not getting a ton of good line assignments. He's got some, guys that are, Nick Bonino was playing with him. He got sent through waivers. So Cooley, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points in his last 8 games, but 21 hits. He's got 2.61 hits per game on the season. So he's been a really consistent hitter. And if he's going to be given any kind of a look, again, they have that perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. He could be the guy. If you're just looking for hits, you could, maybe go a guy like Lauzon. I would probably keep Lauzon, to be honest with you, but Lauzon or somebody else for that front half hitting coverage. Then you come back with the Rangers. You pick up Will Cooley for some hits, and then maybe you go down to a guy like Shen or Parayko for that weekend back-to-back. But he's been a really consistent hitter. Unfortunately, the Rangers just don't score 5-on-5 except for that Lafreniere, Panarin, and Trocheck line. So there's not a whole lot of offense to go along with that, but every now and then he does score. He does have a goal-scoring touch. So if you're going to grab him, he's probably a deeper league play, 2% owned, and you'd hope for some offensive production, but you would at least start with the hitting volume. Now, speaking of the St. Louis connection here, Luke Shen, we mentioned earlier, his brother Braden Shen, I mentioned last week along with Parayko when we looked at some St. Louis Blues, 7 points in his last 6 games, 2 power play points, 13 hits in that span. So really good hitter. 92nd percentile for a center is really good, 1.89 hits per game. He's getting some power play production, 8 power play points on the season. The shot volume just a shade under 2 shots per game. But he's been relatively productive at least the last couple of weeks, 3-4 weeks. You can see here he's been trending up from a 63 all the way up now to a 72 from the beginning of January. So it's been going for a little while now. Braden Shen, dual position eligible. He's 51% owned. He may not be there for you in all leagues, but if he is available and you want that weekend back-to-back at the end of next week, he would be one of the better options that you could pick up. Again, there's Buchnevich. He's, I think, 67 to 70% owned, depending on what league you're looking at. But Braden Shen, a little bit more ownable for you, dual position eligible, getting you some hits, which is going to be your floor, and then you add in the offensive production on top of that. And last but not least, we have Parayko, and I mentioned him last week for basically the same reasons. You're getting you're getting shots and blocks, a couple of hits, 1.09 hits per game, 2.64 blocks per game, 96th percentile there. But he is 93rd percentile in goals. So 8 goals on the year. Again, the league leader in defenseman goal scoring is 13, so he's not far off of that pace. He's on the trade block, so he's going to potentially be showcased from now until the early part of March, and then he could end up going to a Stanley Cup contender. So this could be a great time to go out and pick up Parayko. I picked him up last week. I was pretty happy with it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, Zach Werenski came back from IR, so I did have to drop Parayko. I would like to get him back. I don't know if I have a roster spot, but if you have the ability to grab him, a goal, 3 assists, 16 shots, 20 blocks in his last 6 games. He's been really productive since the beginning of January, as you can see here on his trend graph, going from a 64 all the way up to a 70 now. So he's been one of the better defensemen you can add. You do have Falk there, who's quarterbacking the power play. He's a little bit more owned up. So Colton Parayko would be your peripheral guy who's also going to potentially get you some goal production. Now, we're not going to get into the goaltenders this week because we do have a huge gap between now and when you would probably want to add some guys. There's not a lot of volume in the early part of this week between Monday and Wednesday. So maybe next week we'll look at the goaltending. So that's going to do it for this video. But stay tuned because in Monday and Tuesday, I will be featuring the Western Conference and Eastern Conference Fantasy All-Stars. We'll take a look at some guys who have been getting it done and who aren't necessarily the household names. Some of them are, but they're not going to, we're not going to feature Kucherov. We're not going to feature McKinnon. You know that they're dominant. But the other guys out there, the guys who you drafted way later who have been killing it for your team, we'll take a look at those on Monday and Tuesday. But stay tuned for those videos. And as always, I will see you in the next one.